My name is Eleanor Price, and the day my son emptied my bank account was the day something inside me quietly died. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. That morning began like any other. I brewed my coffee, opened the window to let in the Los Angeles air, and checked my phone to pay the electric bill. But the screen froze, the digits blurred, and then I saw it. Available balance, $0. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I blinked, refreshed the screen, tried again. Still zero. I pressed the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart began to pound in my ears like an old washing machine ready to burst. I called the bank. First came the voice of a robot, then a polite woman who asked questions I barely understood. When she finally spoke, her tone was dry, indifferent. "Mrs. Price, the funds were transferred online to an account under the name of Jackson Arthur Price, my son." For a long moment, I said nothing. I just stared at the faded wallpaper of my living room, the one Jackson had helped me hang when he was 7. I remember how proud he'd been holding that little brush, saying, "We're making a castle, Mama." Now that same boy had taken the walls of my castle down to nothing. When the call ended, silence swallowed the house. The only sounds were the ticking clock in the kitchen and the flickering of a dying fluorescent bulb. Outside, an ice cream truck played its cheerful tune, a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside me. Then my landline rang. My neighbor Doris, always full of gossip, said in her excited voice, "Ellie, honey, have you seen your Jackson's Instagram? He's in Rome, eating fancy food with his wife and her mama. Lord, they look like movie stars." Edited as nevering foreign spaces. I didn't answer. My throat closed as if I had swallowed glass. I walked slowly to my room, opened the drawer where I kept my old smartphone, and searched for his profile. There he was, Jackson. My pride, my pain dressed in white, raising a glass of champagne beside Tanya, his wife, and Rhonda, the mother-in-law, who never looked me in the eye. The caption read, "Rome, my new beginning. I deserve this." And beneath it, Tanya had commented, "Thanks for everything, Mama-in-law," followed by a money bag emoji. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the screen until it dimmed. Then, without anyone to see me, I smiled. But it was a different kind of smile, one that comes when a mother realizes she has nothing left to lose, and therefore, nothing left to fear. That was the moment my silence was born. And in that silence, I began to plan. That evening, I sat in my old armchair, the one I bought decades ago with my first honest paycheck. The fabric was worn thin, but it held the weight of every dream I had ever built for my son. Around me, the house looked smaller, quieter. I could almost hear my younger self scrubbing floors in other people's homes, saving every dollar so Jackson could go to college, so he'd never have to live like I did. I thought of the nights I skipped dinner so he could have enough for his textbooks, of the mornings I left before sunrise to clean bathrooms in the Hollywood Hills. I used to whisper to myself, "It's worth it, Ellie. One day, he'll understand." But that day never came. The betrayal didn't just take my savings. It took away the last bit of faith I had in what I'd spent a lifetime believing that love and sacrifice could never be turned into weapons. I realized that my son hadn't simply stolen my money. He had stolen my dignity. Space. I picked up a small notebook from the table, the one I used to write grocery lists in, and on the first blank page I wrote with trembling hands, "My son didn't die, but the mother in me did." The words didn't bring comfort. They felt like a tombstone carved into paper. I closed the notebook and looked around. Every photo on the walls was a reminder of a life I no longer belonged to. Jackson, as a toddler covered in chocolate. Jackson in his graduation gown. Jackson holding Tanya's hand at their wedding, while I stood at the edge of the frame, half cropped out. How strange, I thought, that a mother can give everything and still end up invisible. Outside, the streetlights flickered. I could hear the faint laughter of children playing somewhere far away. Once, Jackson's laughter had sounded like that. He was a boy who believed the world was good. I used to tell him stories before bed about the stars, saying that each one was a wish waiting to come true. I wonder when he stopped wishing and started taking. I leaned back in the chair, my fingers tracing the cracked armrest, and whispered to the empty room, "Maybe it's time the world sees what silence can do." That night, for the first time, I didn't cry myself to sleep. My tears had dried, replaced by something far stronger, a quiet fire I could feel rising from the ashes of who I used to be. The next morning, I woke before dawn, as I always had. Old habits die hard. I boiled water on the gas stove, the same stove that had fed my son for years, and poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted like metal and memories. The air smelled faintly of bleach and dust scents that had followed me through a lifetime of cleaning houses that were never mine. As the sky began to lighten, my mind drifted back to the years when Jackson was small. I could still see his little shoes lined neatly by the door, his laughter echoing through the hallway as he played with detergent caps like toy cars. We didn't have much, but we had each other. He used to wrap his tiny arms around my neck and say, "You're the best mama in the whole wide world." I used to believe that would never change. When he was 6, one of my employers offered to pay for his private school if I agreed to work full-time and live in. I remember the day I said yes. Jackson had cried, not understanding why his mother couldn't come home every night. I told him, "It's so you can have a better life, baby." I meant every word. Every scrubbed floor, every aching back, every missed birthday. It was all for him. But the years passed, and so did gratitude. He became a man with polished shoes and expensive cologne, a man who spoke to me as if I were a stranger asking for charity. When I first met Tanya, I knew she was trouble. She had the smile of someone who only knew how to take. Her mother, Rhonda, looked at me like I was a stain on her daughter's future. At their wedding, I remember Tanya whispering to a friend, "How did he ever grow up in that house?" I pretended not to hear. Mothers pretend a lot. Now, sitting in my silent kitchen, I realized every sacrifice had been a brick in the prison I built myself. I had raised him to believe that love had no price, and so he took it all without shame, without pause. The phone rang again. It was Doris, with her endless gossip, her voice like static in my ear. She said Jackson had posted another photo, Tanya and Rhonda laughing over champagne. "You must be proud," she said. I smiled faintly and whispered, "I used to be." Then I hung up. It was time to stop being proud, time to start being awake. Days turned into a blur of quiet routines. I swept the floor, watered the dying fern by the window, and pretended that life was still ordinary. But inside me, something restless kept whispering, "Find the truth." I couldn't let the betrayal sit unanswered, like dust settling over an unmarked grave. So one morning, I put on my faded coat, tied my scarf tightly, and walked to see Walter Green, the only man I still trusted. Walter and I had grown up on the same block. He'd gone to law school while I scrubbed floors, but he never forgot where he came from. When he opened the door to his apartment, the air smelled of coffee and old paper. "Ellie," he said, surprised. "It's been years." I handed him a folder of bank letters, my hands trembling. "Walter, something's wrong. My son, he took everything, but I need to know how." He sat me down, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. For a long time, the only sound was the rustle of paper. Then he looked up, his eyes heavy. "Ellie, your name appears as a joint account holder. You didn't sign this, did you?" I shook my head. "Walter, I can barely write my own name." He sighed, leaning back. "Then someone forged your signature. They've been moving money out little by little for months." I felt my throat close. The room seemed to spin. "My son did that?" Walter hesitated, then spoke softly. "It's his name on every transfer." "But Ellie, this isn't just theft, it's fraud. He could go to prison." Prison. The word felt too big, too cruel to fit in my mouth. I thought of Jackson as a baby, his little hands reaching for mine, his laughter in the sunlight. How could the same hands now write my name to steal my life? I didn't cry. I simply gathered the papers, slipped them back into the folder, and stood. "Thank you, Walter," I said, my voice flat. He called after me as I walked out the door. "Ellie, please, don't do anything rash." And their metal broke on into the basements. But I wasn't thinking of revenge. Not yet. I was thinking of something deeper, of justice that doesn't shout, but waits. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my old checkbook. My name, Eleanor M. Price, was written in shaky letters, honest and flawed. Next to it, on the forged form, the signature looked perfect, elegant, soulless. It was the handwriting of betrayal, and I promised myself I would make it mean something. A few days later, while sweeping the living room, I decided to move the old armchair to clean underneath. It had stood in the same spot for 30 years, pressed against the wall where sunlight never reached. As I bent down, I saw something wedged beneath the chair leg, a torn plastic bag wrapped around a white envelope. I might have thrown it away, but something about it made my skin prickle. Inside was a document, creased and yellowed at the edges. I unfolded it slowly, my heart tightening with each line I read. "Last Will and Testament of Eleanor M. Price." It said that upon my death, my home, savings, and personal effects were to be left to my son, Jackson Arthur Price. At the bottom was my signature, perfect, graceful, and absolutely not mine. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words blurred before my eyes. It wasn't enough that he had stolen my money. Now he was trying to steal my grave, too. I called Walter immediately. He arrived within an hour, still wearing his old trench coat. He examined the document under the light, shaking his head in disbelief. "This isn't just illegal, Ellie," he said slowly. "It's dangerous. If he or whoever helped him had filed this, you could have lost your house without ever knowing." I sat down heavily, clutching the table's edge. "He wanted to kill me on paper," I whispered. Walter looked up, unsure if I meant it as a metaphor or not. But I knew exactly what I was saying. My son had tried to erase me, not with a weapon, but with ink. That night, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, though it tasted bitter. I walked through every room of the house, touching the walls, the photographs, the floorboards I had scrubbed 1,000 times. Each one held a piece of my story. I realized that if Jackson succeeded, nothing would remain of me except dust and a name on a fraudulent will. I took the document, folded it carefully, and slid it into the red notebook where I had written my first line of grief. My son didn't die, but the mother in me did. Then I added another sentence beneath it. If he wants to bury me, I will choose where and how my story ends. For the first time in years, I felt steady. Betrayal had taken everything from me except my purpose, and I was ready to use it. 3 mornings later, the phone rang while I was folding laundry. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Evans, the physician at the small community clinic I visited once a year. He sounded hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Price, I need you to come in today. It's about your latest blood tests." The bus ride to the clinic felt longer than usual. My hands clutched the worn leather strap of my purse, the same one I'd carried since Jackson's college graduation. Inside it, I had a small notebook, a few dollars, and an old photograph of my son as a boy. Dr. Evans greeted me kindly but avoided my eyes. That was how I knew. He gestured for me to sit, then said the words that should have broken me. "You have leukemia, Mrs. Price. It's advanced. 6 months, maybe a little more, depending on treatment. 6 months." It sounded almost generous. I stared at a small water stain on the wall that looked like a bird in flight. Then I asked, "Will treatment cure it?" He shook his head. "It might buy time, but it's harsh, expensive. You'd be very weak." I smiled faintly. "Does it make death come sooner?" "Not necessarily," he said, confused. "Then no," I replied. "I don't want to die wearing a hospital gown." He looked at me with pity. But I wasn't looking for comfort. I stood, thanked him for his honesty, and walked out into the California Sunday. The light felt too bright, the air too alive for someone who had just been told her life had an expiration date. But I wasn't afraid. I was free. I walked home instead of taking the bus. Every corner of the city seemed to whisper pieces of my story. The grocery where I used to buy Jackson's favorite cereal. The school fence I once leaned on waiting for him to come out. The small park bench where I dreamed he'd bring me grandchildren one day. When I reached home, I brewed tea and opened my red notebook. On the next clean page, I wrote, "6 months is enough for what I have to do." Then, beneath it, another line. "I was never afraid of dying, only of dying unfinished." That night, I packed away the old family photos and replaced them with blank sheets of paper. My life was no longer about what had been. It was about what was coming. And what was coming would make the world remember my name. After that day, everything in me shifted. I no longer woke up as a mother, waiting for a phone call that would never come. I woke up as a woman with a mission. 6 months wasn't a countdown to death, it was a deadline for justice. I went to see Walter again. He opened the door, startled by the calm on my face. "You don't look sick," he said quietly. "I'm not dying," I replied. "I'm finishing something." We sat at his old kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers and cold coffee. I told him I wanted to report the forgery and the theft not as a mother, but as a citizen. He hesitated. "Ellie, are you sure? Once we start this, there's no going back." I smiled. There's nowhere to go back to. For days we worked side by side. Walter filed a complaint for elder financial abuse and submitted every document I had collected: the forged signatures, the fake will, the bank statements. He contacted Brenda, my neighbor, who had been an accountant for 20 years. Together, they built the paper trail of Jackson's betrayal. I watched it all unfold like a slow chess game. Every pawn, every move, deliberate. Walter found a clause that allowed a temporary freeze of all international transfers when elder fraud was suspected. It was a small window of hope, but it was enough. One evening, while the kettle whistled, I took out my red notebook. On a new page, I wrote, "This is not revenge. It is justice, because what is allowed is repeated, and what is repeated rots." As the ink dried, I looked out my window. The city lights shimmered against the night sky. Somewhere across the ocean, my son was probably sipping wine, believing he had won. He didn't know that his mother, his old-fashioned burden, was setting a trap more precise than any law could design. Walter called 2 nights later. His voice trembled slightly. "Ellie, it's done. The account is frozen pending investigation. Thank you, neither viewed it." For a long moment, I said nothing. I felt the faintest tremor in my hands, but it wasn't fear. It was relief. "Thank you, Walter," I said softly. "Now, let's see what happens when a thief wakes up poor." After hanging up, I sat in my armchair, lit a candle, and watched the flame dance. It wasn't bright or loud, but it was steady, like my silence. A silence that was no longer weakness. It was the sound of a mother sharpening her justice in the dark. While I slept under the cracked ceiling of my little house in South Central, Jackson was thousands of miles away in Rome, pretending to live the dream he had stolen. I could picture him standing on cobblestone streets, wearing his white shirt, raising a glass to Tanya and her mother, laughing as if guilt were a language he no longer spoke. But the world has a way of collecting its debts. It started quietly, one declined card at a restaurant, then another at a jewelry shop. Tanya frowned, assuming it was a glitch. Jackson, nervous, tried another card, but the waiter returned with the same cold smile. "I'm sorry, sir." The bank declined the transaction. Tanya's tone sharpened like glass. "What did you do, Jackson?" he stammered. "Nothing. It must be a mistake." Mistake. That was the same word I had used when I saw my zero balance. By the second day, every account connected to his name had been frozen. His phone buzzed endlessly with alerts. Suspicious activity detected. Funds temporarily held for investigation. Each message was a nail in the coffin he had built with his own hands. Meanwhile, Tanya and Rhonda showed their true faces. In the middle of a crowded piazza, Tanya screamed, "You useless fool! I told you not to involve your poverty-stricken mother. You've ruined everything." Rhonda rolled her eyes, muttering, "He's as pathetic as she is." And it is not to that. Jackson stood there, surrounded by tourists, while the 2 women who had promised him the world walked away without looking back. That night, in their hotel room, he tried calling Tanya, but her number was disconnected. His suitcase was half empty, his wallet nearly the same. Out of desperation, he called me. I was in the kitchen rinsing black-eyed peas when the phone rang. His voice trembled like a child's. "Mom, what did you do?" "They took everything from me. Tanya's gone. Rhonda, too. I'm alone." For a moment, I just listened to his breathing, the panic in it. Then I said quietly, "I didn't take anything from you, son. I just stopped what you were taking from me. Mom, they'll arrest me. You said you'd always be there for me." "I was," I said, "until you stopped being there for yourself." He sobbed. a sound raw and broken. "Please, help me. I don't know what to do." "Learn," I whispered. Then I hung up. The phone was silent after that. Outside, a breeze rattled the window pane, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. My hands were steady. My heart didn't ache. Somewhere in Rome, my son had learned the cost of taking without giving. And I, the woman he'd thought too weak to fight back, had reminded him that a mother's silence is never empty. It is judgment waiting to be heard. The trap was closed. But I wasn't done yet. When Walter called to say the embassy hearing was confirmed, I felt a strange calm wash over me. "You don't have to go in person," he said. "Your statement and the documents are enough." But I wanted to see it with my own eyes, the moment my son faced what he had done. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with care. A gray sweater, a long skirt, and the black bandana I wore now that the chemo would have taken my hair if I'd chosen it. In my purse, I carried a thick yellow envelope filled with the evidence Walter and I had gathered. And something else. Jackson's childhood photos and a small letter I had written the night before. When we arrived, the embassy lobby was bright and sterile. Walter tried to distract me with small talk, but I barely heard him. Across the room, through a glass door, I saw Jackson sitting on a metal chair. His face was pale, his beard unkempt, his eyes hollow. The proud man who once believed he deserved the world now looked like a boy caught stealing candy. An officer guided me to my seat. Tanya was there too, sunglasses hiding her eyes, her red coat like a flag of arrogance. When Jackson noticed me, he stood up so suddenly that the chair scraped against the floor. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I held his gaze. "I came to watch you sign not as a mother, as a witness." Tanya laughed under her breath. How sweet. The old woman came for her final act. I turned to her, my voice steady. "You took everything he had, but I taught him what you'll never have remorse." For a moment, the room went still. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably. The consular officer began the process, placing documents before Jackson. "You must sign to confirm that the accounts were managed with falsified authorization," he explained. Jackson's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. When he finished, the officer nodded. "You are cleared to return to the United States, pending further review." As Jackson stood, I stepped forward and handed him the envelope. "These are your photographs," I said softly. "The first time you walked, the first letter you wrote to Santa, and the letter I wrote to you, not to save you, but so you can't say no one warned you." A tourist waiting nearby accidentally recorded the moment on camera. Later that day, the video spread across social media. People called me the silent mother. In the clip, I could be heard saying, "You were my life, but I was never yours." The world saw dignity, but what I felt was something quieter. A closing door, a final breath before peace. As we left the embassy, Walter whispered, "You won, Ellie." I shook my head. "No," I finished. When I returned home, the California air felt softer, as if even the wind knew my story had reached its end. My house greeted me the way an old friend does, with cracks on the walls and a heart still beating beneath the silence. Walter brought my medicines, Brenda brought soup, and the neighborhood children left flowers by my gate. They didn't know every detail of what had happened, but they sensed something, perhaps that truth had walked through these doors and refused to leave quietly. I grew weaker with each passing day, yet my heart had never felt stronger. Each morning, I sat in my rocking chair by the window, the same spot where I had once waited for Jackson's visits. Now, I waited for the light. The sun always came through the curtains at noon, casting a golden stripe across the floor. I called it my forgiveness. One Sunday, Jackson appeared across the street. He didn't knock. He simply stood there with a paper bag of donuts, the same kind I used to buy for him when he was little. He left it on the porch and walked away. The next week, he came again. Sometimes he left flowers, sometimes a note without a name. He never asked to come inside. He understood that forgiveness doesn't open doors. It opens hearts only when they're ready. That night, I took my red notebook and wrote my final words. My son, love is not demanded, it is given. If you have learned that, then you are not lost anymore. Don't look for me when I'm gone. Look for me in every act of kindness you do, in every wrong you refuse to repeat. That will be my redemption. When morning came, I felt the air grow warm and still. I placed the letter on my lap and closed my eyes. I didn't fear what came next. I had lived long enough to know that a mother's justice doesn't need applause, only understanding. Days later, the neighbors found me in my chair, peaceful, the red notebook resting against my chest. Brenda cried softly as she covered me with the knitted blanket I'd made that winter. Walter said nothing. He just closed my eyes gently, the way one closes a book that has finally said everything it needed to say. At the funeral, Jackson stood in the back, silent. No speeches, no excuses, just tears. And maybe that was enough. Because this story was never about revenge. It was about dignity, the kind that survives even when love is betrayed. To everyone listening, remember this. Money can be earned again, but respect, once stolen, must be rebuilt. One honest act at a time. And when you wrong someone who loved you, pray they choose silence, because silence is not weakness. It's the sound of a lesson you'll carry for the rest of your life.